Hello, everybody. Please ignore everything going on. We're having the house rewired, and so everything's a mess in here. Just ignore it. It'll be gone next time. You guys really like the true crime videos that we're doing. You really, really like it. So we decided we're gonna keep doing it. And we're putting a little twist on it.
A little spin on it, if you will.
Nice. Right here, I have a spinner wheel. We have chosen 9 true crime cases that we will be covering, and we're gonna let the wheel choose what we're doing today. Without further ado, we will spin it and see what we get. The wheel has chosen for us the case of Brandon Swanson. Is the camera crooked? Brandon Swanson was born January 30th, 1989. He was 19 years old at the time of this case happening. He grew up in the small town of Marshall, which is located in Lyon County in Minnesota. So this whole thing is taking place in the state of Minnesota.
Which it seems like there's a lot of true crime from northern states.
Yeah. And Brandon absolutely loved, he adored the Minnesota landscape. He was just so in love with it. He loved driving down the roads and looking at the wind turbines, and that's what he was actually going to college for. He was going to college to study wind turbines. He had graduated from Marshall High School in 2007, and he was enrolling at the local college in Canby to study the wind turbines for a year. His college was only a 40-minute drive, which was about 30 miles, from his house. So instead of living on campus, he would just make the drive to and from whenever he had classes instead of living on campus. It probably saved him money as well. And so it was just more convenient. And this was a straight shot down State Highway 68. So it's not like he had to zigzag a bunch of roads. It was just here to here, point A, point B.
May 13th, 2008 was the last day of classes before break. Brandon decided to stay out and celebrate with his friends. He started the night at a house party in Lind, Minnesota, a town about 7 miles south of his home in Marshall. He had a few drinks over several hours and then said he was heading to another house in Canby. Friends that were at the house party said they didn't believe that Brandon was intoxicated, or at least he wasn't acting like it, so they weren't concerned about him driving. You should be concerned either way.
If anyone is drinking any amount, I just feel like you should not be driving.
I know there's technically a legal limit, and if you've only had a couple drinks over so many hours and blah blah blah, just don't risk it. That's so terrifying to me that you never know if like the other person driving next to you is intoxicated, because people just do it all the time because they're like, oh, I haven't had that many drinks, I'm fine. Are you fine though? Yeah, even if you're driving okay or you think you are, your response time needs to be as quick as possible, and if you've been drinking, it's not, and then you're not only risking you but everybody else, and that is what makes me mad. I don't care if you risk your life because that's your choice, but nobody else made the choice for you to be driving. Brandon drove 40 miles back to Canby without any issues and joined a second party with his friends. He had another shot of whiskey, but still seemed sober enough to drive. How much do you want to bet you're wrong?
Around 1 a.m., Brandon decided that he was going to call it a night. He was going to go home and he was going to go to bed. So he said goodnight to all of his friends. And on the way home, this was the exact same drive that he has made many, many, many times down State Highway 68. At 1:54 a.m., Brandon's parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, woke up to a call from their son. They answered the phone and he said that he needed help. And when you get a call from your child, no matter how old they are, if they're calling in the middle of the night saying that they need help, you're obviously going to help. He told them about how his car was in an accident. He was fine, but his Chevy Lumina had skidded off of the gravel road and into the ditch, and the car was angled in such a way that the front tires were not touching the ground. So if he tried to press on the gas, the tires just spun. And he just kept telling his parents he wasn't injured, but he just needed help. He needed a ride to get back home. His parents asked for his location, and he told them that he was somewhere in between Lind and Marshall on State Highway 68. His parents got into their car and headed to Brandon's location.
It wasn't a far drive. Brandon and his parents believed they were within a 10-minute drive of each other. They reached the midpoint between Lind and Marshall, and they didn't see their son anywhere. They had stayed on the phone, and his parents said they couldn't see him. Which is very odd if you're on the phone with each other and you're like, I'm right here, and they're like, no, you're not. Brandon said that he couldn't see them either, so Brian flashed his headlights and honked his horn and asked if Brandon could see or hear them. Brandon didn't see any sign of his parents. He should have been able to see their lights for miles due to the open fields. Brian and Annette realized this meant Brandon couldn't be close after all. Either Brandon lied about his location or he was too disoriented to know where he actually was. His parents got back in their car and continued driving towards Lind. They figured that if they kept driving towards Lind, they would eventually come to Brandon. They also continued to talk to him on the phone, and this continued for more than 30 minutes.
Was he more intoxicated than he thought he was? Or what? Like, what was the cause of this? And this is before, like, all the whole sharing your location.
He couldn't just drop a pin.
And, yeah. And this is where tensions started growing. Brandon truly believed that the directions that he gave his parents were 100% correct. So he's blaming his parents, saying that they're the ones that went the wrong way and didn't follow the directions that he gave. He said he was going to leave his car and walk to Lind, but his parents, that were still on the phone, were begging him not to do that. At this point, Brian and Annette were starting to get pretty worried. It turns out that Brandon is blind in one of his eyes, and that made walking at night pretty dangerous for him. They started bickering for a bit, and eventually Brandon just got so mad that he hung up.
His mom called him back and apologized. Brandon told them he was leaving his car and going to walk to Lind. He said he would meet them in the parking lot of a nearby bar, and his parents agreed. Before going to the bar, Brian dropped Annette back off at home. Brandon and his dad stayed on the phone, and he kept him updated on his whereabouts. He talked about the gravel road beneath his feet and said he could hear water running nearby.
Just before 2:30 a.m., Brandon yelled, "Oh shit," and then the call disconnected. Brian tried calling his son back, but every call went straight to voicemail. And how did phones work back then? Like, the phone has to be turned off for it to go straight to voicemail, or else it would, like, ring.
Yeah. So it was off or broken.
Yes. Annette, who was at home, started to get really scared at this point, because now they have lost all contact. She started to call all of Brandon's friends that he would have been with that night, just to see if anybody knew anything. All of his friends said that they knew nothing, that Brandon had just said he was calling it a night and going home. Brian reached the bar in Lind that they were supposed to be meeting at, but there was no sign of Brandon. He kept driving down the highway, looking for Brandon, but had no luck.
At 6:30 a.m., nearly 5 hours after they got the first call from Brandon, Annette and Brian reported their son missing at the Lind Police Department. The police were told their 19-year-old son Brandon had disappeared in the forested area outside of town. They wanted to file a missing persons report immediately. They were told that Brandon was a 19-year-old adult and he could go anywhere he pleased, and even said he had a right to be missing. Did you not listen to the story that they were telling you?
In so many cases, police just assume that since it's like a teenager or a person in their 20s, that if they're missing, they just ran away. And I feel like so many cases could progress a lot faster if police took more initiative instead of just assuming, oh, well, he's a 19-year-old man. He's probably just out doing something. He'll show back up.
Even though they had a whole story, like, hey, the police weren't concerned because it wasn't unusual for young men Brandon's age to stay out all night after the last day of classes. Okay, great, but did you listen to what the parents were telling you? They thought Annette and Brian were being overprotective, and this infuriated them.
I would be infuriated too. Infuriated. I put an extra R in there.
Infuriated.
I would be mad if I went to the police station saying, hey, this person's missing, we need to do something about it, and they're like, they have a right to be missing.
And it's not just like, oh hey, didn't come home last night. No, like, we were on the phone with him and we cannot find him anywhere, and like the call disconnected.
Like, at least do something instead of just sitting there looking them in their face and be like, he has a right to be missing. And they were mad. They had every right to be mad. And because they were so mad, they refused to leave that police station until the police did something.
As you should.
They were not going anywhere until they decided to take their son's disappearance seriously. After hours of persuading the police to take this seriously, they finally agreed to do a limited search. And they probably only decided that because they wanted them to leave. They started by searching the perimeter of Lind, which was pretty easy because the town only held 400 people, so it's not that big of a town.
That's
pretty easy to cover.
Very, 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 very small.
It didn't take very long, but the police found absolutely no sign of Brandon. They requested that the Lyon County Sheriff, Joel Dahl, assisted them. They went through Brandon's cell phone records and realized he was nowhere near Lind. His phone call pinged at a cell tower in Taunton, a town 25 miles away from Lind. So what was he doing there? And with this, they realized that Brandon had accidentally sent his parents in the opposite direction. But why was he in the opposite direction?
They searched in the area and found Brandon's car in a ditch off a gravel road along the Lincoln County line, 1 mile north of Highway 68. He was wrong about his location, but everything else he had described about his surroundings and the accident were correct. So he wasn't like not of sound mind, he was still describing things correctly. But why was he in the opposite direction? The doors were unlocked and the keys were missing. 2 of the car's wheels were propped up in the air, which made it impossible to move. The car's location brought more questions than answers. The town he was in wasn't near Lind or Marshall. It was a town named Porter. This was confusing because Brandon's home was a straight shot on the highway. So why did he leave the highway to go down gravel roads?
Yeah, it's a one road, a straight shot. So what happened to make him turn off the road that he knew so well and took it all the time going to and from his classes?
And not only that, like, opposite direction.
Yeah. And with this, the police are like, okay, well, maybe there's some truth to what they're saying. And they keep searching, but Brandon is nowhere to be found. There were no signs of him being near his car, and there were no signs of foul play. Nobody could figure out which direction he even went walking in, because remember he said he was going to walk to the bar in Lind. Which direction did he think that was in, since he was actually in the opposite direction of where he said he was going? The car was surrounded by patches of woodland and vast fields, so you could see for miles around in some directions. During the daytime, the police could see for miles, but they couldn't see Brandon's tracks. The police brought in search dogs, and the search dogs took Brandon's scent and they started tracking it through the fields and into the woodland. The scent trail continued for miles, but it stopped when it hit the Yellow Medicine River. Back when Brandon was on the phone with his dad, he said he was going to walk to the bar in Lind, and he thought that he saw a red light. And he thought that that was from a place in Lind. But he was actually seeing the red light of a grain elevator in Taunton. and he had said that he heard running water. The Yellow Medicine River was probably the running water source that he heard. At this time of the year, the current of the river was pretty strong, and it wasn't just a gentle stream like Brandon had described it. All of the snow that was melting was creating more of a runoff, so it was a lot louder than Brandon had made it out to be. Because he had said that it was just kind of like a creek, but this was a full-fledged river at the moment. It was 15 feet deep at that time, and it was a hazard to anybody walking in the dark. The police quickly came to the decision that he just drowned. They had assumed that Brandon had just been walking through the woods and was on the phone with his dad, and he must have slipped and fell into the river, and that's what would have caused the phone to disconnect so suddenly, and why all of Brian's calls back to Brandon were going straight to voicemail because his phone was broken.
By midday, the search for Brandon expanded into a large-scale manhunt. Officials went into the river and worked their way downstream. They were expecting to find some evidence of Brandon falling into the river, like a piece of clothing or him. Helicopters were flying overhead, police, search dogs, and volunteers were searching in nearby fields. As the day went on, investigators were starting to doubt that he had fallen into the river. There was no sign of him downstream where his scent had stopped. If Brandon had fallen into the river or drowned, he should have been easy to find. His body or his clothes would have washed up almost immediately, but they found nothing. Brandon must have made it out of the river and continued to wander through the fields. One of the search dogs had jumped into the river and then jumped back out to follow a new trail. This one went away from the river and down the gravel road towards a farmhouse in the distance, but it abruptly ended in a nearby field. When the dogs abandoned the trail, the police did as well. They were more focused on and around the river, but also the dog followed a trail away from the river.
Now at this point, Brandon had been missing for almost 18 hours. That's a lot of time for a person to be missing. The first day of searching ended with no discoveries and no leads. The second day of searching, it expanded to 500 volunteers. They used ATVs and horses to cover the grounds faster. More search dogs arrived from places like Minneapolis and St. Paul. Dog handlers from 8 neighboring states flew in to be part of this. A team from Texas brought in an underwater sonar device. On the third day, police determined that the last call Brandon made was within a 5-mile radius of the cell phone tower near Porter. This information narrowed the search significantly. Even with this new information, there was still no trace of Brandon Swanson.
Days turned into weeks and there was no evidence or leads as to where Brandon went, which is crazy. The police brought in cadaver dogs. At first the dogs followed a trail in the opposite direction of the Yellow Medicine River but lost their trails shortly after. Sheriff Vazecki still believed that accidental drowning was the most logical explanation. Every day he walked 2 miles up and down the river looking for a clue. Each time he found nothing. The police had set up an anonymous tip line for anybody that had any information from the night Brandon went missing. They reportedly received 100 calls of information, but none of them led to any progress. Eventually, the sheriff stopped believing Brandon fell into the river and drowned. The river was too small and shallow, and his body would have been found by now. By the end of summer, every lead had gone cold. The search for Brandon got suspended for the time being, but his parents didn't give up.
Fall turned into winter and authorities had to give up the search. Investigators couldn't prove for a fact that he was ever in or near the river. This left Annette and Brian with no closure. They believed that the beginning of the investigation was hindered due to the police's lack of response. They were still upset with the cop who looked them in the eyes and told them that Brandon had a right to be missing. They were determined to keep this from happening to another family.
In the spring of 2009, a year after Brandon had gone missing, his parents traveled to the state capitol. They fought for new laws to be put in place for adults who went missing under dangerous circumstances. A bill called Brandon's Law was introduced by Marty Seifert, minority leader of the State House of Representatives. This required law enforcement to accept any missing persons report without delay. On July 1st, 2009, it passed legislature and was signed into law.
Winter ended and the search started up again, but it was still unsuccessful. By 2010, the local county sheriff's department and police had decided Brandon's case had become too cumbersome to manage. The Yellow Medicine River had been searched more than a dozen times by different search parties. To this day, Brandon has not been found. One theory that people believe is that Brandon had wanted to go missing and ran away from home, but the police and his family just aren't convinced. There was nothing going on in his life that would make him want to abandon everything and start over. Another theory is that Brandon ended up being attacked by a wild animal. There are bears in Minnesota, but if he was attacked by a bear, mauled by a bear, there would have been blood, there probably would have been ripped clothing, there would have been more of a scent and a trail for the dogs, there would have been blood on the ground. Like, the bear wouldn't just take him.
Eat him whole.
Yeah. Another theory is that he was a victim of foul play. That maybe he was walking in the road and he got hit by a car, and the person who had hit him was so scared in the moment that, oh my god, I just hit somebody and they're dead, that they just took him with. But that would also leave a scent trail. It would leave blood. It would leave markings to show that there was an accident, but there was nothing. And with that, that's pretty much it. He has not been found today, and
it's literally like he was abducted by aliens and he just like poof.
Yeah.
Like the dogs couldn't find him. They searched everywhere. He wasn't in the river. They found literally no evidence of him except for his car. Nothing. No clothes, no footprints, no nothing.
And you would think that if he tried to get like a new identity or something, somebody would see something somewhere in America and be like, hey.
Right.
But it's literally like he just dropped off the face of the earth. What if like the river was like a portal and he fell in and ended up in another dimension? Thank you for watching, and I hope you are going to enjoy this new series that we are doing. We are loving it so much, and we can't wait to see what the spinner picks for us next time, so stay tuned if the one that you want to see is the one that we do next.